Hello my dorks, it's the Dork over here, and welcome back to Creepypasta Debunking. This is episode 11, again. So, what do we have in sight for this episode of Creepypasta Debunking? A story that I have a lot of history with, and a story that I have a severe rivalry with on the channel. You know this story? You may hate it like I did. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Squidwards suicide. Now I knew eventually I would have to get to this story in the debunking videos, but never got the chance to do it until right now. And today we are going to finally figure out the truth. Is Squidward's suicide real, or is it just another hoax? Well, let's find out, shall we? Squidward's suicide begins with an intern of Nickelodeon explaining their story on how an episode wasn't as it seemed. Because they worked with Nickelodeon, they were able to view the newer episodes before the public could, which they considered a huge plus. He and some other editors were in the room where copies of episodes were to be sent and looked over. The episode they were supposed to be receiving was entitled Fear of a Krabby Patty. However, upon booting up the episode, they were greeted with a different title. The episode was entitled Squidward's Suicide. At the time, the intern simply brushed this off, due to the fact that because these episodes weren't going to be viewed by the public, the editors decided to fuck around with the titles and simply call them whatever they wanted to. Like instead of Rockabye Bivalve, it was called How Sex Doesn't Work. The title card of the episode played the normal cheery music. So everything seemed in order. However, the true horrors were within the episode itself. The episode started with Squidward within his house, practicing for his clarinet concert that he had the following evening. He was hitting a few sour notes as he normally did, but was interrupted multiple times by SpongeBob. Squidward angrily told him off.
Will you knock it off? I have a concert to practice for!
Oh, sorry, Squidward.
And told him to go away. SpongeBob agreed to this and went to go and see Sandy with Patrick. The bubble splash screen then appeared and transitioned us to Squidward's concert. Before this point, the only oddities were that some frames often repeated themselves, but the sound would soon catch up. However, when Squidward had finished his performance in the concert, real problems begun showing. All the audience members begun booing him, but not in the standard cartoony way. No, there was clear anger, malice, and hatred behind the booing. Everybody within the crowd had hyper-realistic, deep red eyes. They looked human-like. SpongeBob was taking centre frame and booing as well, very much unlike the happy Sponge he was. Squidward looked absolutely terrified and upset. The shot then transitioned to show Squidward on his bed, looking very forlorn. The view of his porthole window indicated that this was night, and directly after the events of the concert. The most unsettling bit was that there was no sound, nothing, not even the feedback from the speakers in the room, and Squidward just sat there, blinking for about 30 seconds, before he began to sob quietly. He placed his tentacles over his eyes, and quietly sobbed for a full minute more. All the while, a very subtle sound in the background begun growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through a forest. The screen then proceeded to slowly zoom upon his face. By slow, it's only noticeable if you look at shots 10 seconds apart side by side. His sobbing got louder and louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitched slightly and twisted upon itself for a split second, before it returned to normal. Below the sound of the wind and the sobbing, a very faint something was playing. It sounded like laughing. and it came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, so you had a hard time pinning it down. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame had been replaced. The lead animator paused and rewound frame by frame. What they saw was disgusting. It was a disfigured and mangled body of a dead child, lying on the pavement. The screen then flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing louder than before, and half body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in a hyper-realistic style, looking as if you touched it, you would actually get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded much more violent, as if it was a gale blowing through the forest. There were even snapping sounds of branches, and the laughing lasted longer and appeared more frequently. 20 more seconds passed, and the screen once again flashed a single frame over the video. The editor was reluctant to go back. They all were, but they knew they had to. And this time was what appeared to be another disfigured child. A little girl, and she was no older than the first child. The only female in the room quickly dashed out, as the show resumed. After 5 seconds, Squidward went silent, as did all of the sound, like it was when the scene begun. He put his tentacles down, and his eyes were now done in hyper-realism, like the others were in the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen, as if watching us. He then began sobbing, but without covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud, and most fear-inducing of all was his sobbing was now mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate, and the wind sound returned once more. Eventually, none of the employees in the room could stand the madness. They then called the creator, Mr. Hillenburg, to the scene. He arrived within 15 minutes, and was confused as to why he was called down there, so the editor resumed the episode. Once the few frames were now shown, all screaming, all sound once again stopped. Squidward was just staring at the viewer, full frame of the face, for about 3 seconds. The shot then quickly panned out, and a deep voice said, "Do it." And we see in Squidward's hand a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Hyper-realistic blood and brain matter splattered on the walls around him. He flies back and hits the wall at full force. The last 5 seconds of the episode simply showed his body on his side. Well, what was left of it. The episode then ended. Mr. Hillenburg was furious and he demanded to know what the hell was going on. Most people had left the room at this point, so it was just a handful of the employees to watch it. They rewatched it a few more times to fully analyse the entire episode. The theory was, somebody in the chain from the drawing studio edited the file and created all of this disgusting imagery. All of the equipment involved with production of the episode was examined for foreign software and hardware, as well as glitches, but everything checked out fine. No one knew what happened, and still to this day, nobody did. And there was an investigation to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child scene was identified, and no clues were gathered from the data involved, nor any physical clues in the photos. The intern never believed in the supernatural, but now, they tend to question things. So, that was the story of Squidward's suicide in a summary. A very well-known story. I'm pretty sure all of us at this point had heard the tale of Squidward's suicide. It is one of, if not the most famous lost episode creepypasta of all time. It certainly scared me as a young kid. back to the topic at hand. The episode is scary, surely, and certainly has caused a lot of people nightmares. But now we ask the question, is Squidward's suicide real, or is it a hoax? Well, Squidward's suicide is not real, and there is a good amount of evidence proving my claim that Squidward's suicide is not real. And to finally put this story to rest for all of you who were scared by it, we will run through the evidence proving this story to be false, right now. You already know what I'm gonna say as my first point. Ladies and gentlemen, say it with me. News reports. Ladies and gentlemen, news reports. If this episode existed, the press would be all over Nickelodeon, and this would not be a covered up incident by far, especially considering there were dead children within it. I don't think Nickelodeon would allow the interns or whoever worked on the early episodes to change the titles to something crude and lewd. Nickelodeon is a children's company, and they aim to make all of their products good for kids, even if they aren't aired at all. But the biggest point of evidence to say that this story isn't real is because the original author admitted it. On a post on Reddit, the original author of Squidward's suicide came out and was thanking people for how famous and popular his story had become. He was inspired by other creepypastas like Suicide Mouse and Dead Bart. He was bored that night and decided to write his own story, and the rest is history. He even went as far as to provide a screenshot from the original 7chan post, where he made Squidward's suicide. Words coming directly from the writer, disproving the story is false. That's a primary source, my friends. That's conclusive evidence enough for me to prove that Squidward's suicide isn't real. However, before we close this episode off, I'd like to show you a fun little Easter egg / reference that official SpongeBob made to this story. A pretty well-known fact and fun little reference. In the episode Squidward in Random Land, SpongeBob and Squidward are stuck within the titular Random Land, and they go about opening a bunch of doors trying to find their way out. Squidward opens the door, and he finds a toned-down version of the original Squidward suicide image. Of course with all things like blood and guts and everything removed for the kids. But that is 100% referencing Squidward's suicide by far. However, this fun little reference didn't last long, as within the next couple weeks, this reference was edited out and was replaced with a baby Squidward that looked creepy. Sad to see that this reference is gone, because I think this is one of the only few times that a creepypasta has been referenced from its original source material. So I guess you could say Squidward's suicide kind of existed at one point in time, but was of course changed. However, the original clips of that scene with the Squidward suicide reference are still floating around out there somewhere on YouTube, and I'm sure there's going to be full videos of the actual episode with the reference of course still remaining intact. But in case you the viewers want to know what it actually looked like, I will show you a comparison of the episode with the reference and the episode without the reference.
This place is a nightmare! Oh, this place is a nightmare!
In my humble opinion, I think I always will prefer the one with the reference. I may not have the best history with Squidward's suicide, but I still wanted to see it succeed and gain more fame. But alas, I guess it wasn't to be. Also, all the full videos of Squidward's suicide out there, and all Red Mist, they're very similar, those are not real in any way. Andrew Skinner in the post actually said that the videos that were made were not made by him, and therefore not real. Also, if they were trying to make episodes like this to be real, I'm pretty sure Nickelodeon would be on their ass with copyright strikes. So all the official episodes of Squidward's suicide and / Red Mist you see online are simply fan-made videos of other episodes edited together to make it seem scary. So with all of this evidence on the table, I think we can confidently conclude that Squidward's suicide is fake and not real. So if anybody's having dreams at night, thinking that this episode will haunt you or that it's somewhere out there, you can sleep easy tonight knowing that it's not real and never existed. It's just a fan-made story by somebody who was bored watching creepypastas and decided to make his own. And Andrew Skinner, if by some miracle you see this, thank you for making a story that scared me so much that inspired me to do creepypastas. I may not think it's the best story of all time, but I respect it a lot more than I used to, so thank you. This has been episode 11 of the Debunking videos. If you liked it and you'd like to see a few more, be sure to like, comment and subscribe as it's totally free and you can unsubscribe at any point. Also comment down below, what creepypasta should I go after in the next episode? But until next time, I'm the Dark Author, and I will see you all later. Take care everybody.